Leveson 2 was cancelled based on fear of Rupert Murdoch and fear of billionaires who control our press.
Hugh Grant has called for police to investigate the Sun owners. David Sherborne, Harry's barrister, said there were grounds for a fresh police investigation. Do you agree?
We've got lots of evidence that shows that a lot of senior executives lied before a public inquiry, lied before Parliament, perjured themselves. Even the judge admitted that Piers Morgan lied before a public inquiry. You know, he's not out of the woods yet because we have a stack of evidence against him, and if the police don't act against these people who've been guilty of criminal wrongdoing, then they'll face private prosecutions.
Do you feel let down?
It's a bit depressing.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, that's on February the 24th, and finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there. I'm joined now by Steve Coogan, who has just delayed the interview so he can check his crib notes for what he thinks are going to be the difficult questions. Steve, I've never seen you looking like this. You look quite old-fashioned. Am I allowed to say old-fashioned?
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
What's that about?
Well, I normally have a jacket on, but I don't know. I thought, well, I'm quite a big fan of tank tops because they're sort of like a respectable gilet, you know. I don't want to look too countrified. So
and the very dark, slicked back hair.
My dark hair is because I've had to dye it for a play I'm doing, Dr. Strangelove, and I have to play an officer who's supposed to be 10 years younger than the other actor in the scene, and I'm not. I'm 10 years older than him, so they figured from a distance, if you dye your hair dark, you might look younger.
Is that the secret?
Something like that. But
yeah.
Anyway, so.
But you've also just finished playing Brian Walden, who is this sort of 70s, 80s TV interviewer from being a politician, and you're in this new drama, Brian and Maggie, which is coming out, I think, this week, Wednesday.
Something like, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Channel 4. And it's basically about the long-form interview, the relationship between politician, interviewer, and critically, I suppose, it's about Thatcher's legacy too. Yeah,
it's quite a complex piece because it's about class as well, I think. About, you know, public and state education and how meritocratic our society is, and all those internal contradictions about that Thatcher had. I mean, Rob Burley, who does produced Andrew Marr's show, wrote this book about the history of the political interview, and came to me with this story about Brian Walden and Margaret Thatcher. And of course, I remember Brian Walden from when I was a lot younger. He was a sort of a fixture on a Sunday and did these long form 45, 50-minute long interviews, and his subject normally had the barest of briefings about what they were going to be asked, so they had to know their stuff, and they sort of lived or died on their ability to think in the moment and how across the subject they were. And I think there's a point to be made about the drama, which is that we've lost something in the news cycle we have now to that forensic approach to interviewing. I mean, I know there are notable exceptions who try to keep the spirit of investigative journalism alive and forensic probity.
Is that what it said on your crib notes?
Yeah, that's
like flatter her in the first minute, right? Yeah. Last time we spoke, Steve, you told me that you removed a scene as you were worried about making Margaret Thatcher too sympathetic. It spurred the Mail to say it had sparked fears of a woke whitewash.
A woke it's not at all. I'm fascinated by, I mean, I grew up in a household that deplored her, a sort of lower middle class background, not so very different from the class that she came from. But and all our neighbours loved her, but we didn't. And it was to do with sort of that idea of, we fostered children, and it was about you put things back, and if you have more money, you help people who have less money, and it wasn't the kind of free-for-all or sharp elbow, sharp knee society. We didn't want to be part of that. But having said that, she, through the sort of mists of time, my attitude is sort of modified to her because she was an outsider. She was outside the establishment as she perceived it, as was Brian Walden. And I gravitate towards the story because I find those figures fascinating. And I've always been fascinated by that tension, certainly within the Conservative Party, between the sort of noblesse oblige, old money Conservatives and the sort of the new money meritocratic Conservatives, and that the resolution of that has never really fully happened. And there are merits to both schools of thought.
Do you think it was her class that allowed her to do the things she did?
I think people recognised that she wasn't. I think ordinary people. The reason she communicated with working class people is because they recognised that sort of the shopkeeper's daughter in her definitely chimed with people. I mean, the irony is that far from being an outsider of the establishment, she became the agent of the establishment in a way, preserving a lot of those things that she that she sort of tried to break through. I would say that the old money Conservatives would always take care of they would realise their obligations to the poor, but they wouldn't let them in the front door. They'd have to use the tradesman's entrance, whereas Margaret Thatcher would let you in the front door, but you had to show your bank balance first, because it was about success, material success with her.
And do you think class still plays a part in how we choose our politicians now? I mean, in a way it's changed, hasn't it? You take somebody like Nigel Farage, who portrays himself as the outsider, but he went to Dulwich College, he worked in, Forex, foreign exchange. Trump, billionaire, portrays himself as the outsider. Starmer kind of gets cast as the arch establishment stooge, and yet came from this very modest sort of Surrey upbringing.
I suppose we try to sound like what we're not, don't we? I remember hearing a story that there were plenty of grammar school prime ministers through the last 4 centuries. Actually, probably more conservative, state-educated prime ministers than Labour. The grammar schools produced this wave of prime ministers, and I heard that Nicholas Soames said when David Cameron was elected, said normal service has been resumed because we had an Etonian back as Prime Minister. So it's something that fascinates me, certainly because I feel I identify with Brian Walden as an outsider, and in terms of class, I sort of identify with Margaret Thatcher as an outsider. But the one thing I do respect is that she had a clear ideology. It's not one I agree with. But it's the same reason that Tony Benn respected her, and they respected each other for having clarity about what they thought, and not just a kind of a make, do and mend approach, which is the pragmatism of most modern politicians.
But I guess my question's about the outsider. Do we have to re-evaluate what we consider to be outsider status? Because everyone wants to be the outsider now. That's what I mean. Farage is the outsider, Trump's the outsider. Being part of the establishment is seen as the route to political failure. Yes,
that's true. But I mean, the fact that these billionaires are able to frame themselves as outsiders is because I think is the failure of the failure of the centre ground to offer a clear vision, because the centre ground of British politics is about trying to keep the train on the tracks and not do anything too radical, not scare the horses. Mixed metaphors.
You don't want a horse on those tracks.
You don't want a horse on those tracks, especially the train coming. Right, so because those people have taken that approach, there's no, and the pragmatism and sort of political consensus has meant that certainly the people who feel disenfranchised, their situation hasn't changed. It doesn't matter if the Tories are in or Labour are in, nothing really changes. So anyone comes along with any kind of position themselves as any kind of outsider, then they attract those people's attention because nothing's really changed because of globalisation. Some people just fall off the table and it's just hard luck. So Donald Trump appeals to the Rust Belt in America. And
the billionaires. But they can all cast him as an outsider.
That's just about how he presents himself, because it's just like I'm not part of it's not because he isn't part of the establishment. He's more dangerous than that, because the establishment, although they're seen as ineffectual, they're not dangerous. They're just sort of ineffectual. The only reason they're dangerous is because they let people like Donald Trump come along. Same with Brexit was attractive to people who had completely disenfranchised because it was better than what we've got. It was just anything that upsets the apple cart has got to be good.
So what's the answer to that then? If you are from the centre ground, do you break things? Do you go massively radical? Can you fix things without breaking things?
No, but I think you can. You don't have to think in a linear left-right way. Vision isn't just about being extreme. It's about thinking in different ways, thinking in ways thinking of new ways to do things, ways to empower people at the bottom by giving them. There's a sort of an attitude towards those who are disenfranchised, which is a kind of this aristocratic benevolence
we know
what's best for you. Here's something to keep you going. Don't have any ideas yourself, or don't take any initiatives. You'll only make a pig's ear of it. Just take this little bit of money to keep yourself from starving. And as we know, most people who are on welfare don't want to be on welfare. They're sort of stuck. They're in a trap, and the very few of them are sponges. They want to be given enough help to be able to get themselves in a situation where they can empower themselves. And there are lots of initiatives around the country, cooperative type initiatives, and some charitable ones that are ground up initiatives from these disenfranchised people. They're not top down solutions.
Why isn't it working then? I mean, I guess you could say it did work here in this country. It got Labour elected with a huge majority, but in a lot of places now, there is a sense that that's not working. Whatever the sort of the middle of the road incumbent is saying isn't working. I mean,
it's some strange ways. When Trump was first elected, I thought, well, it wasn't quite as depressing. I mean, it was depressing. So I tried to and find some sort of positive spin on it, and I thought, well, it does mean that you can upset the apple cart, and you could upset the apple cart in a way that's not pernicious or malevolent. Quite what that is, I don't know, but it shows that.
Is there an example of it around the country, around the world?
I think there have been examples of it where it started out and it's gone a bit pear-shaped, but it always goes pear-shaped. Normally when people are repressed, you get someone who comes along and offers an alternative, but then they get sucked into the sort of establishment way of doing things. What you want is someone with the presentation skills of Trump, who has the welfare of most people, of the disempowered, at the forefront of their mind. It's just that those people haven't come along yet.
Let's go back to Brian and Maggie. There is a moment where Brian Walden's producers in his ear, in your ear, at one point saying, "Why won't she give an inch? She just doesn't back down at all." And Walden replies, "We're taught not to. They wouldn't let us in if we were weak." I mean, Thatcher's strength, people would argue, is kind of what got her there. It's the opposite of compromise politics, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a place for that, but there's also a place where you have to acknowledge what hasn't worked. And the thing is, the sort of legacy of the policies she's introduced, it took sort of a good 20 years to see what had and hadn't worked. And as we know, competition gets sequestered by monopolies, and there is no real competition. Look at the water companies. There's no competition for the consumer there. That idea of privatising it, that would all become a shareholder democracy, didn't happen. Trickle-down economics, it trickled down so far and then stopped. The idea that it would go all the way to the bottom, didn't happen. But she offered something clear when the sort of post-war consensus was floundering. And do
you think we are still answering to her? Do you think she is still very present in the words of everyone we elect and everyone who votes?
Well, the right mythologise her. Even though they killed her, they stuck the knife in. They now sort of seem to have forgotten that they did that. That she was killed by her own kind. But I think there's a sort of failure of recognition that people are so terrified of making mistakes or slipping on banana skins or having something in social media because they made a mistake, are terrified. So they're just risk averse. So no one really says anything they really believe in. She did do that, and she wasn't worried about people disliking her. That's a good thing. Leaving aside the fact that a lot of the policies, I think, failed, notwithstanding, that was she didn't. She had a clear vision.
I mean, there's a bit right at the end where this phrase is used about her, off her trolley, like there's the sort of the army of the cabinet sort of appear before her, and you suddenly recognise, certainly in the drama, this sort of phalanx of men and her in the middle. I mean, she would never want to be called, I imagine, a victim of sexism, but do you think she was?
I think she was a victim of sexism, but she was the architect of that because she just hired men. So she was partly responsible for the fact that she was subject to that kind of sexism at her own hand. But yes, no doubt that there is an element of that in the way she's caricatured. But I think partly she didn't listen to her cabinet colleagues. Although she hired them all, she sort of had this barely disguised contempt for them, which was based on class, definitely, not on their abilities, because she wouldn't have hired them. She didn't think they could do the job. But she also had this this barely disguised veneer of contempt because she was self-made.
The drama also hails the long-form TV interview, which has all but disappeared now. I wonder if you think that accountability is dying with it. I mean, if you look at something like a Joe Rogan podcast, which is long, definitely, it can be 3 hours long. There's a lot of talking in there, and it seems to sustain people's interest, but it doesn't try and hold anyone to account. It lets the public make up their mind. I wonder if you think that we've given up asking for accountability or even truth.
It's strange because out in social media it becomes this atrocious sort of trading of insults, and I don't know, maybe there's a desire to try and avoid that, but holding people's feet to the fire is, I think, has perhaps become the victim of not wanting to be unpleasant, if you like. So that we're not accused of being just atrocious.
Really? Do you think? I mean, I don't know if I buy that. Do you think that people are more pleasant?
No. I mean, maybe in terms of like the coziness of podcasts and political chit chat, that context. No, out there in social media, no, it's the reverse. There's no nuance at all out there.
I mean, I guess that's the point, isn't it? That if Joe Rogan wants to get Trump or Vance or Zuckerberg on his show, he wouldn't get them if he held them to account, because nobody's looking for a rough ride.
No.
I mean, Russell Brand, would do an interview with Tucker Carlson and probably won't be asked about sexual assault allegations. No. Is that now the new world? Do you think we're not demanding of accountability?
I don't think we are in the way that we were once.
Why?
I think it's because everything's market driven. Because the world out there is, we need to get people's attention. And I think back when Brian Walden was at the helm for every Sunday, there wasn't enough choice. So people had to eat their greens, and when they did eat the greens, they realised that they enjoyed it.
So the greens are gone. We're just on vitamin supplements now.
Vitamin supplements and fast food. But I think there's something. But all I can do, is tell stories about this stuff and things that I think are interesting and worthy of discussion, and also getting older now, looking back, realising there are people who don't know the name Brian Walden. They'll know the name Margaret Thatcher, and it's important to sort of flag up these people who did their best to hold people accountable, even when they were seduced by them initially, as Brian Walden was with Margaret Thatcher.
Steve, hold it there. There is one point in the drama where Thatcher says, "Why do people fear the media?" In a moment, we're going to be talking about the media, phone hacking, and whether that's changed now. So let's go back to that line. She says, sort of innocent-eyed, wide-eyed, after her first encounter with Brian Walden, which she's really enjoyed. Why do people fear the media? Do you fear the media? Do you fear the press media?
No, I don't fear them. I think that the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lack of accountability. I think there's been a successful lobby to confuse independent accountability with somehow an impingement on freedom of expression or freedom of the press, which I fear the proprietors being able to dictate the national conversation. People talk about the fact that newspapers aren't as influential as they once were, but they're still. Everyone talks about the papers. Every news bulletin, they or any kind of political analysis, they sit around and talk about the newspaper. The newspapers still dictate the agenda. If people were concerned about, truly concerned about freedom of speech, they'd be concerned about the fact that there's a handful of billionaires who control the message and control what those newspapers say. And I think I don't agree with the idea that to have freedom of expression, there are some people who are abused, people who are disenfranchised, victims of crime, who consistently have been the subject of illegal activity by newspapers whose proprietors have gotten away scot-free, while the people, the foot soldiers in those newspapers, have been thrown to the wolves. Rupert Murdoch's paid out £1 billion in damages. I'm torn between thinking, well, that money could either have been spent on public interest journalists doing real journalism, or and then the other part of my brain thinks, well, at least maybe that's £1 billion he doesn't have to spend on propagating the lies that he tells and his organisations tell to push their own skewed right-wing agenda.
Just to sort of fill in for our listeners who may be coming to this new, you're referring to the phone hacking scandal. Mm-hmm. The Leveson inquiry into phone hacking was nearly, 13 years ago. You gave evidence then in 2011 after what you called a sociopathic sting by the News of the World. It had revealed details about your life, and I think a year after, you then settled with them, with Newsgroup newspapers, for the hacking of voicemails. And you said it'd be very wrong if it were ever again left to private citizens to take on the might of the newspaper industry to address wrongs on such a scale. Do you think anything's changed?
Unfortunately, our legal system means that the people who did want to subject these illegal sort of malpractice to the scrutiny of a court because of the failure of Parliament or anyone else to hold these people to account, or the police, in fact, to hold these people to account, in a court of public inquiry, ultimately failed. Going to court in private prosecution or in lawsuits is the only way to have this thing exposed. And because of the nature of the way the law works, if you're likely to get a settlement which is less than or is more than if you proceed with your legal process after and achieve less than what you were promised earlier, you'll then become liable for the cost of the entire court case. So
this is what happened.
So that's what happened
Prince
to Harry.
Harry.
It also happened to. Well, I mean, I had a settlement from News International, as it was then, and the Mirror Group paid me substantial damages, and I wanted to go to court, but I was told by my lawyers, if you go to court and you get offered less than this, then you're liable to pay for everything, and then I'd lose my house, so I can't do that. I think if Prince Harry had proceeded, he would potentially have been left with a bill of between 20 and 25 million pounds for the entire cost, even if he'd won. So basically, people like Rupert Murdoch can just buy themselves out of any kind of trouble or scrutiny that would reveal criminal wrongdoing.
I'm going to give the Newsgroup newspapers' response to what happened after the Harry settlement last week. They said, our apology, the Duke of Sussex, includes an apology of unlawful activities carried out by private investigators working for The Sun. So what they are differentiating between is whether it was Sun journalists, which they have strongly denied, and the investigators that they hired.
This is nonsense. It's like saying if you hire a hitman to carry out an assassination, that you're not responsible because they were doing it and not you. And also they claim that not to have known that the activities of these private investigators were illegal. Well, if the practices were legal, they would have done it themselves, because all these private investigators were doing things that ordinary foot journalists would do. The reason the journalists the private investigators were hired was to put distance between them, because they knew what they were doing, sort of blagging, phone hacking. They knew they were illegal activities. It gave them some sort of deniability to hire them, because they were doing the same work as journalists would ordinarily do. So for them to assume that what they were doing was just legal, and it's a surprise to them that they were engaged in illegal activities, is a nonsense. And and by hiring them, they are complicit.
Hugh Grant has called for police to investigate the Sun owners. David Sherborne, Harry's barrister, said there were grounds for a fresh police investigation. Do you agree?
Yes.
Would you participate in it if you were asked?
Of course, I've got. I mean, we've got lots of evidence that shows that a lot of senior executives lied before a public inquiry, lied before Parliament, perjured themselves. If these CEOs were of any other organisation, they would already have been brought to heel, because there is a fear amongst the people who are supposed to hold these people accountable of the power of Murdoch and the power of the journalistic press to affect their electability. They get cold feet. Understandable, but not particularly admirable.
We keep on hearing that actually newspapers don't have the same power now, that basically Elon Musk's got all the power, that social media's got the power, that, the press barons aren't what they were. Do you agree with that?
First of all, the same malpractices happen with newspapers online as they do out there in the sort of printed journalism world. Basically people need to be held accountable. The people who've been thrown to the wolves are these foot soldiers. Rebecca Brooks, who is running the most powerful media organisation in the world, has not been held properly to account. If the police don't act, there will be private prosecutions.
Rebecca Brooks literally faced a criminal trial and she was found not guilty.
Yes, but we believe that there are questions, unanswered questions, things that weren't brought up in court. We've got evidence of systemic malpractice.
Even though she's been found not guilty by an actual court of law?
Yes, even though she's been found not guilty by an actual court of law.
So what are you actually asking the government to do? I mean, when you say press barons should be held to account.
Well, basically, the newspaper proprietors and the executives who lied under oath and committed crimes of perjury and lied. Even the judge admitted that Piers Morgan lied before a public inquiry. Said as much. Piers Morgan came out and said, "I never instructed anyone to hack a phone, and I never personally hacked a phone myself," which is a very qualified denial.
Well, he said he didn't know how to hack a phone.
Today, a judge in the High Court in London has ruled on various cases, including Prince Harry's claim against Mirror Group newspapers, where I was an editor until 2004. The judgment finds there is just one article relating to the Prince, published in the Daily Mirror during my entire 9-year tenure as editor, that he thinks may have involved some unlawful information gathering. To be clear, I had then, and still have, zero knowledge of how that particular story was gathered. All his other claims against the Daily Mirror under my editorship were rejected. With regard to the judge's other references to me in his judgment, I also want to reiterate, as I've consistently said for many years now, I've never hacked a phone or told anybody else to hack a phone, and nobody has produced any actual evidence to prove that I did.
No,
he actually said he
didn't know how to hack a phone.
how to do it.
Of course, he doesn't know how to hack a phone. He doesn't have to do it. It's the other people who do it for him, and then he doesn't. And then he doesn't. Of course, he doesn't know literally know how to hack a phone himself.
But that's an aspersion, isn't it?
Of course, it is.
I mean, that you're saying.
Well, Piers Morgan, look, he's not out of the woods yet, because we have a stack of evidence against him, and if the police don't act against these people who've been guilty of criminal wrongdoing, then they'll face private prosecutions, and that's going to happen.
Do you feel let down that there hasn't been more?
Leveson 2 was cancelled because it was a purely political decision based on fear of Rupert Murdoch and fear of billionaires who control our press, billionaires who impede freedom of speech far more than a few celebrities or a few victims of crime who have their lives intruded to. They're not going to impede freedom of speech and independent regulation. Don't forget, Harold Evans said the giant of British journalism, held aloft rightly as the apotheosis of the campaigning journalist, said that the caricature of Leveson's findings by the press was a gross distortion. And these were carefully considered means that would not only it was not only independent press accountability, but that would protect public interest journalism. The same mechanism would have protected journalists who, if someone wanted to accuse, I don't know, Coca-Cola of something, or McDonald's or something, or Rio Tinto
Let's
Zinc.
just say here that they have done
They've done
wrong.
nothing
Yeah,
wrong, but let's suppose it's some huge organisation who you have to qualify on podcasts because of the might and power that they have. That mechanism that was designed by Leveson was designed to protect journalists from going after these behemoths as much as it was to hold the untruths and mistreatment of victims of crime by the press. So the same mechanism would hold both those people to account. And of
It
course,
sounds like you want to bring a prosecution.
well, it's not over, and there's going to be some. We want to wait and see what happens with the police first before anything happens.
Have you been contacted?
No, of course not by the police. No, I mean, I think they're just as News of the World gives senior police officers columns when they retire, or used to. So, but I mean, I'm not holding my breath, but I think that it would be smart if they did. I mean, when the evidence is incontrovertible, it's there, and it's almost irrefutable. It seems pretty grubby not to act.
I want to talk a bit about the next generation. When Chivalry came out, what was it, a couple of years ago? For anyone who didn't see it, it was a drama about sexual politics, I guess, in the wake of the Me Too movement. And you at the time said it was an education for you. As a man, you rewind, you look at your behaviour. I thought I was Byronic, you told the Times. If I was still shagging around now, it'd be a bit grim. Do you still feel that about Me Too? Or does Me Too now feel a long time ago?
No, not at all. I think there's two questions. One is like people's personal behaviour, and one is the culture that we live in, and I think there was a time when men had to listen and needed to shut up, but I think that time has moved on now, where it needs to be a conversation between genders about how we talk to each other in a way that that's safe but doesn't lack humanity.
Do you think it did start to lack humanity?
I think in all these things, in all these protocols, sometimes in like all work protocols, in trying to account for poor behaviour, you also penalise people who are just being nice. For example, having a sense of humour is a judgment call. Sometimes when you make someone laugh, you're teasing them. Now, you could reframe that as bullying. It all depends on how it's executed, how you do that. And it's very hard to legislate for things like that. Before the Me Too movement, there was the whole blasphemy thing. What is making a joke about someone's belief system? Is that there's a hugely misguided thing Blair tried to do years ago with those potential blasphemy laws, which was an awful idea. And similarly, I think with the Me Too movement, I think it is important to have a conversation about this stuff and realise that nothing is bulletproof, and that you can throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have to protect people and have these things in power. But there are sometimes you can find an exception that shows that something is. I mean, I've been working on a theatre production. There's lots of people backstage, and lots of women, and the women sort of joke with me, and some of the jokes are kind of flirty jokes, and I'm really comfortable with that. That's their decision, and I really like it because we all have a laugh. Because when you're in harsh working conditions, people like to have a sense of humour.
When you look around now, and I'm really talking probably more about the next generation than our generation, let's say. The voices that are most amplified are Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, reborn again as a sort of right-wing Christian. Channel 4 has got this sort of Gen Z survey coming out this week that says 45% of male respondents, very young, aged 13 to 27, said we'd gone so far promoting women's equality, we're discriminating against men. And that when it comes to giving women equal rights, things have gone too far.
No, of course I don't agree. That's ridiculous.
But what do you do with 45% of the young who look to Andrew Tate, who look to Jordan Peterson, who look to Russell Brand and say, they are our influences. They're our role models now.
I think, but by not being nuanced about your position, you help create this opposition. So what you have to say is, let's have a conversation. If you, that's what robs the Andrew Tates and the Jordan Petersons of their misogynistic power. Is not to put your hand up. Is to maybe not with those people particularly.
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? That actually they don't need to have a conversation with people like me or dare I say you.
No, but the people on the other side of the fence, the people, the result, the Me Too movement, I think that in saying this is how you behave, and we're not going to engage in a conversation about it, then empowers the Jordan Petersons and empowers the Andrew Tates by appearing to be intransigent. And in actual fact, you need to grow in number and say this is a consensus of people, men and women, and whatever else they identify as, come together and say we believe in these values, and that's a much stronger argument than.
Steve, dare I say it's a very Lib Dem response. That actually, if you're faced
that really hurts.
I know, I knew it would wound. If you're faced with Andrew Tate, online, if you're faced with, Alex Jones or whatever, online, this sort of, the toxic masculinity, as we probably haven't seen it like in the digital age before. What is your actual response to that?
Well, it'd probably be quite a masculine one. I'd probably like to punch him. Not very constructive, but that's what. When it comes to someone like Andrew Tate, I think he's a disgusting individual. And Jordan Peterson, I think I think there are some people who get a buzz out of their contrariness, and just they get a buzz out of winding up. Liberal people. They just it gives them some sort of adrenaline rush. I think that's. I think that when there's a consensus, I always think that people like a lot.
But it's not just a buzz. It's like heavily monetized, very rich.
I know.
Powerful,
I mean, you
right?
extrapolate that into the fact that it's an industry.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it happens with a lot of people. Even with Christopher Hitchens, after a brilliant intellectual he was, towards the end of his life, he started to. I think when you want, if you have a great intellect, it's stimulating to be in opposition to something more than to find consensus, because that's a bit boring. And in actual fact, when the fire is in the conflict, and there's something that is attractive about that, and it's dangerous, but it's real.
You said before the general election that you were feeling politically homeless. I think you said, actually, Keir Starmer left you feeling politically homeless. How are you feeling now?
I mean, not much better, to be honest. I mean, no, I feel like there's no vision at all. I feel, I know it's. I mean, the only thing is, it's like, well, be careful. It's not as bad as what's going on over there, or it's not as bad as this, and the world's in chaos, and be grateful that we're not, we've not been taken over. We're not living in a dictatorship. That's probably is the best, the most positive I can be.
Do you think that Keir Starmer is equipped to tackle the rise of populism? I mean, when Elon Musk starts dictating government policy at 4 in the morning.
I don't know. That's it's really worrying. I don't know whether you I don't know what the answer is. I think on the one hand you think, well, do you sort of make your position clear and say, this is unacceptable, or you give woolly responses like Keir Starmer has to do with Donald Trump and everyone else, and just look, and his response to the situation in Gaza, which is just, it all seemed like like someone says, just show me the least worst option. It's like some sort of insurer looking at just doing an evaluation of what's the least damaging thing to say, and that becomes all that happens. So things slowly edge forward with no real momentum, but with no potential pitfalls. It's a bit depressing.
On that bombshell, Steve Coogan, thank you very much.
Thanks.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.